In a post-Holocaust political environment, it was assumed that the world would be more inclined to prevent similar atrocities from occurring again. However, from the years of 1960 to 1996, the government of Guatemala openly declared war on its own citizens strictly on the basis of their race. There were no protests, there was no outrage, there was no action. The world watched silently. Institutionalized racism against the Maya reaches back to the hierarchical system established during Spanish conquest. In the 16th century, Spain spread its cultural, religious, and societal ideologies into the Americas. During this time, the indigenous population of Guatemala was subjugated to second-class citizenship through the practices of land acquisition, slave labor, and the implementation of a racial caste system. The following centuries integrated Maya inferiority as a deeply rooted aspect of Guatemalan culture. These prejudices remain to this day. Throughout the latter half of the 20th century, Guatemala underwent several administrative changes. After the implementation of an oppressive regime in the mid-1950s, several left-wing guerrilla groups took up arms against the government. Many of the later atrocities committed by the government during the Guatemalan Civil War were in the name of counterinsurgency. The height of this brutality occurred between 1981 and 1983 under the administration of Efraín Ríos Montt. The 75,000 people killed during Ríos Montt's rule were almost exclusively Mayan, prompting the UN Historical Clarification Commission to classify this conflict as a genocide. During the last 6 months under Ríos Montt's predecessor, the army began to include women, children, and the elderly as targets. Military violence was no longer focused solely on guerrilla groups. The entire rural Mayan population was vulnerable.
There are Defense Intelligence Agency reports. There are embassy cables. We have, in fact, one CIA document from 1982 that was produced by the station in Guatemala City that specifically describes one of the massacres that were taking place in the Ixil Triangle at the time. And the reporting officer is quite clear about what's happening up there. It says the well-documented belief by the army that the entire Ixil Indian population is pro-guerrilla has created a situation in which the army can be expected to give no quarter to combatants and non-combatants alike.
Yo lo vi todo, cómo hicieron los patrulleros para matar a las mujeres. Vinieron los patrulleros aquí en este lugar y lo tomaban en los pies los niños y llegaban en estos lugares donde sus cabezas fueron estrelladas. Encuentran los árboles, encuentran las piedras. Es una lástima, porque los árboles y las piedras no hablan. Y parece que hay muchas gentes que difícil creerla, pero en la memoria de los sobrevivientes que son huellas que nunca podrá olvidar.
Explaining the Mayan genocide as a means to prevent the expansion of guerrilla control fails to recognize that a majority of those killed were unaffiliated with guerrilla groups. In actuality, race played a key role in the violence experienced by indigenous peoples. The active guerrilla organizations of the time assumed that the Mayan people would be receptive to their ideals due to the oppression and economic disparities that they faced. Insurgency leaders based their operations in regions with high Mayan populations to spread their message.
Todo nuestro pueblo está trabajando junto en la unidad nacional revolucionaria guatemalteca. Solo unidos podemos ganar. ¿De acuerdo? Sí. ¿Cuáles son nuestras ideas de lucha? Que todos puedan expresarse, que todos los guatemaltecos, indígenas y ladinos sean iguales, que todo el pueblo tenga el derecho de vivir en paz.
However, many Mayans were unreceptive and had no interest in taking up arms to oppose the government. The concentration of guerrilla activity in Mayan regions led the government to create civilian defense patrols, or PACs, that coercively armed Mayan peasants to fight guerrillas themselves. Military officials punished those who refused to participate, claiming that they were guerrilla fighters or sympathizers. This put many in the position of choosing to fight either for the guerrilla ideology or the packs. Regardless, many had no choice but to participate in the armed conflict. The government's complete disregard for Mayan life, demonstrated by the obligatory participation in violence, illustrates their view of the Maya as an expendable and inferior race. Throughout the duration of the Civil War, the military and packs were responsible for 90% of civilian deaths, most of which were Mayan. Although the measures that led to the Mayan genocide appeared to be a method of combating guerrilla insurgency, in actuality, it was a government strategy that maintained and strengthened the imposed racial hierarchy already present throughout the country. After nearly 40 years of conflict, the violence finally came to an end. In 1996, the guerrilla groups and the government signed peace accords to end the Civil War. Many historians note this as the end of the Mayan genocide. At this point, the UN, as well as the Guatemalan government, took steps in order to prosecute those who had committed crimes. Efraín Ríos Montt was found guilty of genocide. However, the Guatemalan Constitutional Court has since declared a retrial and he has evaded justice. Many other perpetrators of state violence have also been put on trial, but records of witness intimidation and protection of defendants by the army have made it difficult for justice to be attained. Even though the genocide itself is over, the complete disregard for indigenous people continues. In a 2011 case study conducted by the Instituto de Iberoamérica, only 20% of Guatemalan military deputies found the human rights of cultural or ethnic minorities to be an important issue. Due to the government's continued lack of concern, the indigenous people of Guatemala continue to feel the repercussions of the genocide to this day.
And of course, that had a really strong impact on our family. We had to leave our house, we had to leave all our possessions behind. We were violently displaced. And it also meant that there were members of my family who were forcibly disappeared. And we're still looking for those people. 5 years ago, we actually were able to find a nephew of mine. And luckily, he was still alive. We thought that he was dead, and he thought that we were dead. But 5 years ago, we found him.
Although survivors continue to speak up about what they have endured, the prejudice and disregard for the Mayan people has kept their genocide and its effects silent.
Don't forget the people of Guatemala who died. And don't forget the people of Guatemala who are still alive fighting for justice, despite yesterday's nightmare and today's impunity.